The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Silas Boone knew it was trouble the moment he saw the crimson wax seal, the mark of the Western Matrimonial Agency, stamped with their ornate double heart insignia. He'd been expecting correspondence, yes, but not this. Not the heaviness of the paper, not the way his name had been written in that sharp, unforgiving script. He stood in the doorway of his ranch house, the Wyoming wind pulling at his collar, dust devils spinning across the valley floor. Red Hollow stretched out before him in every direction, miles of sagebrush and stone, cattle grazing on slopes that turned gold in the afternoon light, the distant mountains standing like sentinels against a sky so wide it hurt to look at. Beautiful, brutal, empty. Silas ran a thumb under the seal and broke it. The letter inside was brief, curt even, the kind of language that pretended at professionalism while delivering a knife to the gut. Dear Mr. Boone, we regret to inform you that the arrangement previously discussed has been terminated. Miss Evelyn Hart, age 34, has been evaluated by our committee and deemed unsuitable for frontier placement. Her application has been withdrawn, and she will be returned to her previous residence on the evening of the 17th inst. We apologize for any inconvenience. A revised candidate list will be forwarded within the month. Respectfully, Howard Pritchard, Senior Coordinator, Western Matrimonial Agency. Silas read it twice, then a third time, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Unsuitable. Returned. He folded the letter slowly, his calloused fingers creasing the paper with more care than it deserved. The wind picked up, rattling the porch boards, and somewhere out beyond the fence line a cow lowed, low and mournful. He'd never met Evelyn Hart, never even seen a photograph. The agency didn't work that way. You filled out forms, listed your assets and expectations, paid your fee, and waited. They matched you based on practicality, age, health, willingness to work, ability to endure isolation. Romance was a luxury. Out here, survival came first. But still, the idea of her had taken root. For months, Silas had imagined a presence in the empty chair across from him at supper, a voice in the kitchen. Another set of hands to share the endless labor of keeping a ranch alive. He'd cleaned out the spare room, repaired the sagging bed frame, even bought a mirror and hung it above the washstand. Small preparations. Quiet hopes. And now, with a single piece of paper, all of it had been swept away. Unsuitable. The word sat heavy in his chest. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the barn, the letter still clutched in one hand. His boots crunched over the dry earth, and the horses nickered as he passed their corral. He didn't stop. He kept walking until he reached the fence at the edge of his property, where the land fell away into a shallow draw thick with juniper. From here, he could see the neighboring ranch, Caleb Thorne's spread, twice the size of his own, with a new barn and a house that didn't leak when it rained. Caleb had gotten married last spring through the same agency, a woman from Ohio. 26, blonde, efficient. Silas had seen her at the general store once, moving through the aisles with the kind of brisk competence that made other women look slow. Caleb treated her well enough, but Silas had also heard the way he talked about her in town, like she was a purchase he'd made, a solution to a problem. "Got myself a good one," he'd said, slapping Silas on the shoulder. "Young, strong, doesn't complain. You'll see when yours gets here." Silas had nodded, said nothing, but something about it had left a sour taste in his mouth. He looked down at the letter again, at that word. Unsuitable. What did that even mean? Too old? Too plain? Not strong enough? He didn't know Evelyn Hart, didn't know what she looked like or how she spoke or what had brought her to the point of signing up with an agency in the first place. But he knew one thing. She'd been brave enough to try. Brave enough to pack up whatever life she'd had before and come west to a place that broke people as often as it made them. And now she was being sent back. Rejected. Dismissed. Like she'd failed some test she didn't even know she was taking. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Silas folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he turned and headed back toward the house. By the time the sun dipped below the mountains, Silas had made a decision. He didn't think about it too hard. Thinking led to second-guessing, and second-guessing led to staying put. He saddled his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Della, and rode into town as the sky turned the color of a bruise. Red Hollow wasn't much. A single main street lined with storefronts, a saloon, a church, a train depot. On a good day, you might see 24 people. Tonight, the street was nearly empty, just a few wagons tied up outside the saloon and a dog sleeping in the middle of the road. Silas tied Della to the post outside the depot and stepped inside. The station was small, dimly lit by a single oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. A clerk sat behind the counter, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers. He looked up as Silas entered, his expression shifting from boredom to mild curiosity. "Help you, Boone? When's the evening train?" The clerk glanced at the clock on the wall. 40 minutes. Heading east. Silas nodded. "Anyone waiting on it?" The clerk's curiosity sharpened. "Why?" "Just asking." The clerk studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "There's a woman, came in this afternoon with a fellow from the agency. She's out on the platform." Silas's pulse kicked up, just slightly. He kept his face neutral. "Alone?" "Agent's still with her. Suppose he's making sure she gets on." The clerk leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Heard about that? The Hart woman? Shame, really. But I guess the agency knows what they're doing." Silas didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the door that led to the platform. "Boone," the clerk called after him. "Don't go making trouble." Silas pushed through the door without looking back. The platform was narrow, just a strip of weathered wood running alongside the tracks. A single bench sat against the station wall, and on it sat a woman. Silas stopped. She was smaller than he'd imagined, narrow-shouldered, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a dark traveling dress, plain and well-mended, and a bonnet that shadowed her face. A single suitcase rested at her feet, brown leather, scuffed at the corners, the kind of case that had seen a lot of miles. Beside her stood a man in a suit. Howard Pritchard, Silas assumed. Tall, thin, with a neatly trimmed mustache, and the kind of posture that suggested he thought very highly of himself. He was speaking to the woman in low, measured tones, the way you might talk to a child or a dog. "Understand this is difficult, Miss Hart, but the decision has been made. You'll be much better suited to a position back east. The frontier simply isn't—" He trailed off as Silas stepped into view. Pritchard straightened, his expression shifting to one of polite suspicion. "Can I help you?" Silas ignored him. His eyes were on the woman. She had looked up when he approached, and now he could see her face. She wasn't young, Pritchard's letter had been clear about that, but she wasn't old either. Somewhere in that strange middle ground where the world stopped calling you a girl but hadn't quite decided what to call you instead. Her features were fine, delicate even, though there was a tiredness around her eyes that spoke of long nights and longer disappointments. Her hair, dark and streaked with a few strands of gray, was pinned back in a simple knot. She met his gaze without flinching. "Miss Hart?" Silas said. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. "Yes." Pritchard stepped forward, positioning himself between them. "Excuse me, sir, but this is agency business. If you have questions, you can direct them to our office in—" "I'm Silas Boone." The name landed like a stone in still water. Pritchard blinked, his composure slipping for just a moment. "Mr. Boone, I sent you a letter this morning. I trust you received it?" "I did." "Then you understand the situation. Miss Hart's placement has been revoked. She'll be departing shortly." Silas looked past him, back to the woman. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable. Wary, maybe, or just tired of being talked about like she wasn't there. "Why?" Silas asked. Pritchard frowned. "I beg your pardon?" "Why was she rejected?" The agent's jaw tightened. "Mr. Boone, the agency's evaluation process is thorough and confidential. We make determinations based on a variety of factors, all designed to ensure the best possible outcome for both parties. In this case, it was decided that Miss Hart would not be a suitable match for frontier life." That's not an answer. Pritchard's patience was clearly wearing thin. "With all due respect, sir, it's the only answer you're entitled to. The contract has been voided. Miss Hart will return to her previous residence, and you will be provided with a new list of candidates. The matter is settled." Silas's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced them to relax. "And what if I don't want a new list?" Silence. Pritchard stared at him. "I'm sorry?" What if I want her? The words came out rougher than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. The woman, Evelyn, went very still. Pritchard's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, condescension. Mr. Boone, I don't think you understand. Miss Hart has been evaluated and found unsuitable. The decision is final. You evaluated her, Silas said. Not me. The agency's standards exist for a reason. Your standards, Silas shot back, not mine. Pritchard's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at Evelyn, as though expecting her to interject, but she said nothing. Her hands were still folded in her lap, but her knuckles had gone white. The agent turned back to Silas, his voice dropping to something meant to sound reasonable. Mr. Boone, I understand you may be, disappointed, but you must trust that we have your best interests in mind. The frontier is unforgiving. A woman of Miss Hart's age and circumstances would struggle to adapt. You deserve a partner who can meet the demands of ranch life, someone younger, stronger. She looks strong enough to me. Pritchard's composure cracked. This is absurd. You haven't even spoken to her. Then let me. Mr. Boone, let me speak to her. Pritchard opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Evelyn stood. The movement was sudden enough that both men turned to look at her. She was shorter than Silas had thought, barely reaching his shoulder, but there was something about the way she held herself, straight-backed, chin lifted, that made her seem taller. It's all right, Mr. Pritchard, she said quietly. Her voice was low, steady. Not soft, but not hard either. The kind of voice that didn't waste words. Pritchard hesitated. Miss Hart, I don't think... I said it's all right. The agent's jaw worked for a moment, but he stepped aside. Evelyn looked at Silas. Up close, he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her mouth was set in a firm, guarded line. She'd been crying recently. He could tell from the redness around her lashes, but she wasn't crying now. Mr. Boone, she said. Miss Hart. They stood there, two strangers on a train platform, while the wind picked up and rattled the station sign overhead. You don't know me, Evelyn said finally. No. You don't know anything about me. That's true. Then why are you here? Silas considered the question. He could have lied, could have softened it into something more palatable, but he didn't. Because they told you that you weren't good enough, he said. And I don't think that's true. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. You don't know that, she said. No, but I'd like the chance to find out. Pritchard made a noise of frustration. This is highly irregular. Stay out of this, Silas said, not looking at him. The agent sputtered, but fell silent. Evelyn studied Silas for a long moment. Then, quietly, she asked, Why? Why what? Why do you care? Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. You could wait for the new list. Get someone younger, like he said. Someone the agency approves of. Why would you want me? It was a fair question. Silas didn't have a good answer. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe because I'm tired of being told what I should want. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. What are you offering? She asked. Silas hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. A place to stay. Work, if you want it. No promises beyond that. And if it doesn't work out, then you leave. No hard feelings. Just like that. Just like that. She looked away toward the tracks that stretched east into the darkness. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, low and mournful. That's my train, she said softly. Silas nodded. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she bent down, picked up her suitcase, and turned to face him. All right, she said. Pritchard's eyes went wide. Miss Hart, you can't be serious. I'm very serious, Mr. Pritchard. She looked at the agent, and for the first time Silas saw steel in her gaze. You told me I wasn't suitable, that I didn't belong out here. Maybe you're right, but I'd rather find out for myself than spend the rest of my life wondering. The train whistle sounded again, closer now. Pritchard's face had gone red. This is completely against protocol. The agency will not be held responsible. Then don't be, Evelyn said simply. She turned back to Silas. I'll need my things sent to your ranch. I'll arrange it. And I'll expect fair wages if I'm working. Fair enough. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Then I suppose we have an agreement, Mr. Boone. Silas, he said. Evelyn. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam. Passengers began to disembark, and the platform filled with noise and movement. Pritchard was still sputtering protests, but neither of them paid him any mind. Silas picked up Evelyn's suitcase and gestured toward Della, tied up at the post. You ever ridden a horse? Not in a long time. It'll come back to you. They walked away from the platform together, leaving Pritchard and the train and the whole mess of agency protocol behind. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Evelyn sat behind Silas on Della's broad back, her hands gripping his coat to steady herself. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The night had settled in fully now, the stars sharp and bright overhead, the land rolling out around them in dark, shapeless waves. Silas's mind was racing, though his face didn't show it. What the hell had he just done? He'd bought himself a stranger. No, that wasn't right. He hadn't bought anything. He'd made an offer and she'd accepted. But still, he didn't know this woman. Didn't know if she could cook or work or handle the isolation. Didn't know what kind of trouble she might bring with her. And yet, when he'd seen her sitting on that bench, suitcase at her feet, waiting to be sent away like unwanted cargo, something in him had snapped. He'd spent most of his life alone. He'd told himself he preferred it that way. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint. Just him and the land and the work. But the truth was, loneliness had a weight to it. A slow, grinding pressure that built up over years until you didn't even notice it anymore. Until one day you realized you hadn't spoken to another soul in a week, and it didn't bother you the way it should. Silas had been disappearing into that silence for a long time. And then a letter had arrived, and for a few brief months, the silence had felt a little less absolute. Now here he was, riding home with a woman he didn't know, and he had no idea what came next. Behind him, Evelyn shifted slightly, adjusting her grip. How far? She asked. Another mile. It's dark. I know the way. She fell silent again. Silas wondered what she was thinking, whether she regretted her decision already, whether she'd last a week before demanding to be sent back east. He wouldn't blame her if she did. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise, a dark shape against the darker sky, windows unlit, surrounded by the skeletal outlines of the barn and corrals. It wasn't much. Silas knew that. But it was solid. He'd built most of it himself, plank by plank, and it had weathered every storm the valley could throw at it. He reined Della to a stop in front of the porch and dismounted, then reached up to help Evelyn down. She hesitated for just a moment before taking his hand. Her fingers were cold. Once she was on the ground, Silas grabbed her suitcase and led the way inside. He lit a lamp on the kitchen table, and the warm glow pushed back the darkness just enough to see by. The house was small. A main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom off to one side, and a smaller room in the back that he'd set up for her. The furniture was plain, handmade, functional. No rugs, no curtains, no decorations, just the bones of a life. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. Her expression was unreadable. It's not much, Silas said. It's fine. He set her suitcase down by the door to the back room. That's yours. Bed's already made. There's a washstand and a basin. I'll bring in water in the morning. She nodded. Kitchen's here. Help yourself to anything. I keep coffee on the stove most mornings, bread in the box. If you need something and it's not here, let me know. Another nod. Silas shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of himself. Look, I know this isn't... I don't expect... He trailed off, then tried again. You're safe here. I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time since the station, something softened in her face. Thank you, she said quietly. Silas nodded. I'll let you get settled. If you need anything, I'll be in the barn for a bit. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Silas? He looked back. Why did you really do it? She asked. At the station. Why did you stop me from getting on that train? He thought about it. About the letter, and the word unsuitable, and the way Pritchard had talked about her like she was a problem to be solved. Because you deserve better than that, he said finally. Evelyn's eyes shimmered just for a moment, but she didn't cry. Good night, Silas. Good night, Evelyn. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom. Through the thin wall, he could hear small sounds: the creak of the bed frame, the rustle of fabric, the quiet settling of another person in his house. It had been so long since he'd shared this space with anyone. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, high and lonesome. Silas closed his eyes and tried not to think about what he'd set in motion. But sleep was a long time coming. Morning came too early and too bright. Silas woke to the sound of roosters and the pale gray light that came before dawn. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the house settling. Then he remembered the train station, the woman, the choice he'd made, and his eyes snapped open. He dressed quickly, pulling on worn trousers and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. His boots were by the door where he'd left them, caked with yesterday's mud. He stomped into them and made his way to the kitchen, moving as quietly as he could. The door to Evelyn's room was still closed. Silas started the fire in the stove, filled the coffee pot from the water barrel, and set it to boil. The routine was so ingrained he barely thought about it. But this morning, every movement felt strange, like he was performing for an invisible audience. He was pouring his first cup when he heard the door open behind him. Evelyn stood in the doorway, already dressed. She wore the same dark traveling dress from last night, though she'd removed the bonnet. Her hair was pinned back again, severe and practical. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes, her face pale in the early light, but she was upright, shoulders squared. "Morning," Silas said. "Good morning." An awkward silence settled between them. Silas gestured toward the pot. "Coffee?" "Please." He poured a second cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, wrapping her fingers around the tin mug like she was trying to warm them. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "Well enough." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Silas nodded toward the table. "Sit. I'll get breakfast started." "I can help." "You don't have to." "I'd like to." He hesitated, then stepped aside. Evelyn set down her coffee and moved to the counter where he kept the bread and preserves. Her movements were efficient, no wasted motion. She found a knife in the drawer without asking, sliced the bread into even pieces, and set them on a plate. They worked in silence. Silas fried eggs in a cast-iron skillet, while Evelyn set the table. It should have felt natural, two people sharing a kitchen, but instead it felt like they were dancing around each other, careful not to get too close. When the food was ready, they sat across from each other at the small wooden table. Silas ate quickly, the way he always did when he had work waiting. Evelyn ate more slowly, her eyes drifting around the room, taking in details. "You built this yourself?" she asked finally. Silas glanced up. "Most of it. Bought the land 8 years ago. House took about 2 years to finish. It's sturdy. Has to be. Winters here'll tear apart anything that isn't." She nodded, her gaze moving to the window. Outside, the valley was beginning to glow with the first real light of day. The mountains in the distance were still dark silhouettes, but the sky above them was turning from gray to gold. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Silas followed her gaze. He'd stopped noticing the beauty a long time ago. Out here, beauty was just another word for harsh. "It's unforgiving," he said. Evelyn looked back at him. "Most beautiful things are." Something in her tone made him pause. He studied her across the table, this stranger he'd brought into his home. She was looking down at her plate now, pushing eggs around with her fork. "You don't have to stay, you know," he said. "If you've changed your mind." Her head came up sharply. "Have you?" "No. But I wouldn't blame you if you had." Evelyn set down her fork. "Mr. Pritchard told me I wasn't suited for this life, that I'd fail out here. I'm not interested in proving him right on the first day." "Silas," he said. "What?" "You called me Mr. Boone. It's just Silas." A faint smile touched her lips. "All right, Silas." He nodded and went back to his eggs. After a moment, Evelyn spoke again. "What do you need from me?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "You brought me here. You said there was work if I wanted it. What kind of work?" Silas pushed his empty plate aside. "Ranch doesn't run itself. Cattle need tending, fences need mending, chickens need feeding, garden needs planting when the weather warms up. There's washing, cooking, cleaning. More than one person can handle alone. I can do that." You've done it before? I've done a lot of things before. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. I'm not helpless, if that's what you're worried about. I'm not worried? You sound worried. Silas leaned back in his chair. I'm just trying to figure out how this works. I'm not used to having someone else around. Neither am I. They looked at each other across the table. The sun had risen higher now, and light poured through the window, catching dust motes in the air between them. We'll figure it out, Silas said finally. Evelyn nodded. We will. He stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. I've got to check on the cattle this morning. Fence came down in the north pasture last week, and I need to see if they've wandered. Should be back by noon. What should I do while you're gone? Silas thought about it. There's firewood that needs stacking behind the house. Chickens need feeding. Coops out back, feeds in the barn. After that, you can settle in, unpack your things, get a sense of the place. All right. He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door and paused. Evelyn? She looked up. If you need anything, if something happens, there's a rifle above the door frame. You know how to use one? Her expression didn't change. Yes, Silas nodded. He didn't ask why. Everyone out here had their reasons for knowing how to shoot. He stepped outside into the cold morning air, leaving Evelyn alone in the house. The valley stretched out before him, vast and still. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were moving, dark shapes against the pale grass. Silas took a breath, let it out slowly, and headed toward the barn. Behind him, inside the house, he heard the faint clatter of dishes being washed. It was a start. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window and watched Silas disappear over the ridge. He rode with the easy posture of a man who'd spent most of his life in a saddle, his body moving with the horse like they were one creature. When he was out of sight, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The house felt enormous now that she was alone in it. Empty. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the sparse furniture, the bare walls, the stove that still radiated warmth. It was a bachelor's house. Functional. Clean enough. But devoid of anything soft or decorative. She thought about the home she'd left behind. A boarding house in Philadelphia, a single room on the third floor with a narrow bed and a window that overlooked an alley. She'd lived there for 6 years, working as a seamstress in a factory that paid just enough to cover rent and food and nothing else. 34 years old and nothing to show for it. That's what her sister had said the last time they'd spoken. Margaret, 2 years younger and already married with 3 children, living in a proper house with a proper husband who worked at a bank. Margaret had looked at Evelyn with something between pity and disdain. You can't keep waiting for something better to come along, she'd said. You're not getting any younger. Evelyn had applied to the matrimonial agency the next week. She'd filled out the forms honestly. Age, 34. Health, good. Skills, sewing, cooking, basic reading, and arithmetic. Willing to relocate? Yes. Willing to marry? Yes, if the match was suitable. She'd sent in the paperwork with a small photograph. Nothing flattering, just a plain portrait taken at a studio near the factory. And waited. 3 months later, she'd received a letter. A placement had been found. A rancher in Wyoming. Name, Silas Boone. Age, 38. Property, 160 acres. Status, unmarried. The letter had included a train ticket and instructions to arrive by the 17th. Evelyn had packed her life into a single suitcase and said goodbye to no one. But then, at the Philadelphia station, just before she was supposed to board, another agent had appeared. A woman with a tight bun and a mouth like a knife slash. She'd pulled Evelyn aside, looked her up and down, and frowned. How old are you? 34. The woman had made a note on her clipboard. And you're going to Wyoming? Yes. Have you been informed of the conditions out there? The isolation? The labor required? Evelyn had nodded. I was told. The woman's frown had deepened. I'm going to recommend a reevaluation of your placement. Wait here. Evelyn had waited and waited. Hours passed. Other passengers boarded and departed. Finally, the woman had returned with a man, Howard Pritchard, tall and thin and reeking of self-importance. Miss Hart, he'd said, not unkindly, I'm afraid there's been an error. Your placement has been withdrawn. Why? The frontier's not suitable for women of your age and circumstances. We're going to send you back and find you a more appropriate situation. What circumstances? Pritchard had shifted uncomfortably. You're unmarried at an age when most women are already established. That suggests certain difficulties. We have a responsibility to ensure successful placements, and frankly, your profile raises concerns. Evelyn had felt something cold settle in her chest. You're rejecting me because I'm too old. We're protecting you. I didn't ask for protection. But it hadn't mattered. The decision had been made. She'd been loaded onto a train heading west, not to Wyoming, but to the nearest depot where she could be sent back east. Pritchard had accompanied her the entire way, speaking to her in that same patronizing tone, as though she were a child who needed guidance. And then Silas Boone had appeared on that platform. Evelyn closed her eyes, remembering the moment. The way he'd looked at her, not with pity, not with desire, but with something simpler. Recognition, maybe. Like he'd seen her as a person, not a problem. She opened her eyes and looked around the empty kitchen again. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The firewood was stacked in a haphazard pile behind the house, logs of varying sizes jumbled together with kindling. Evelyn spent the better part of an hour organizing it, stacking the larger pieces in neat rows and separating out the smaller scraps for starting fires. Her hands blistered quickly. She wasn't used to this kind of labor. Sewing was precise, delicate work, nothing like hauling wood. But she didn't stop. Every time her muscles screamed, she thought about Pritchard's voice. Not suitable, too old, certain difficulties. She kept stacking. When the wood was done, she found the chicken coop. It was a small structure near the barn, wire mesh stretched over a wooden frame. Inside, half a dozen hens clucked and scratched at the dirt. Evelyn located the feed bin in the barn, exactly where Silas had said it would be, and scattered grain into the coop. The chickens swarmed her feet, pecking frantically. One of them, a large red hen with a crooked beak, pecked at Evelyn's boot hard enough to leave a mark. "Rude," Evelyn muttered. The hen squawked indignantly. Evelyn checked for eggs and found 3, still warm. She carried them back to the house in her apron, careful not to crack them. By the time she finished, the sun was high and her back ached. She washed her hands at the pump outside and went inside to unpack. Her suitcase sat where Silas had left it, just inside the door to the small back room. Evelyn carried it to the bed and opened it. Inside were the remnants of her old life. 2 more dresses, both plain and dark, a nightgown, a hairbrush, a small wooden box that held her mother's wedding ring. Evelyn had never worn it, but she couldn't bring herself to sell it. A book of poetry, the spine cracked from too many readings. A few letters from Margaret, though Evelyn wasn't sure why she'd kept them. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a photograph. Evelyn pulled it out carefully. It was old, the edges frayed, the image fading. A family portrait. Mother, father, 2 daughters. Evelyn couldn't have been more than 8 when it was taken. Margaret was 6, sitting primly on their mother's lap. Their father stood behind them, one hand on their mother's shoulder, his expression serious. Both parents were dead now. Her father from a factory accident when she was 16, her mother from illness 2 years later. Margaret had married and moved on. Evelyn had stayed behind, working, surviving, waiting for something she couldn't name. She stared at the photograph for a long moment, then wrapped it back in the cloth and tucked it into the drawer of the small bedside table. The room was sparse, just the bed, the table, the washstand, but it was hers. That was more than she'd had in a long time. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the fear, the wild, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. Outside, a horse whinnied. Evelyn stood and looked out the window. Silas was riding back toward the house, Della's head bobbing with each step. He dismounted near the barn and began unsaddling the mare, his movements quick and practiced. Evelyn smoothed down her dress, tucked a loose strand of hair back into place, and went to meet him. Silas saw her coming across the yard and paused, one hand on Della's bridle. She looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow. But there was a set to her jaw that hadn't been there last night, a determination in the way she moved. "Cattle all right?" she asked when she reached him. "Most of them. Lost one to a cougar last week, but the rest are where they should be." Evelyn nodded like she understood. Silas doubted she did, but he appreciated the effort. "Wood stacked," she said. "Chickens are fed. Found 3 eggs." Good. They stood there, awkward again. Silas busied himself with removing Della's saddle, hoisting it onto the fence rail. I was thinking, Evelyn said. About lunch. What about it? I could make something, if you tell me what you have. Silas glanced toward the house. There's salt pork in the cellar, beans, some potatoes. Not much else until I get to town next week. That's enough. He hesitated. You don't have to eat. I want to. She met his eyes. I'm not here to be a burden, Silas. Let me help. He nodded slowly. All right. Evelyn turned and headed back toward the house. Silas watched her go, then shook his head and led Della into the barn. This was going to take some getting used to. Lunch was simple but good. Fried salt pork, boiled potatoes, beans cooked with a bit of onion. Silas ate in silence, surprised by how much better everything tasted when someone else had made it. Evelyn picked at her food, eating small bites. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Finally, Silas broke the silence. You did good this morning. She glanced up. It was just chores. Still, you did good. A faint flush crept into her cheeks. Thank you. They went back to eating. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the shutters. Silas could smell rain coming, still a few hours off, but close. Storm's moving in, he said. Evelyn looked toward the window. How can you tell? The air, the way the wind shifts. You live out here long enough, you learn to read it. Will it be bad? Probably just rain, maybe some thunder. Nothing to worry about. She nodded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. City folk didn't like storms. They liked walls and roofs and the illusion of safety. You scared of thunder? He asked. No. She said it too quickly. Silas allowed himself a small smile. It's all right if you are. I'm not. Suit yourself. They finished the meal in silence. Afterward, Evelyn cleared the plates and began washing them. Silas stood, intending to head back outside, but something stopped him. Evelyn? She looked over her shoulder. I'm going to be working in the barn this afternoon, mending tack. If you want to come out, see how things work, you're welcome to. She turned to face him fully. You don't have to include me in everything. I know, but you said you wanted to help. Can't help if you don't know what needs doing. Evelyn considered this. Then she nodded. All right, let me finish here first. Take your time. Silas grabbed his hat and headed outside, leaving the door open behind him. The barn smelled like hay and leather and horses. Evelyn stepped inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. Silas was sitting on an overturned crate near the back, a saddle across his lap, working a piece of leather through a buckle. He glanced up when she entered. Close the door. Don't want the chickens getting in. Evelyn pulled the door shut and walked toward him. The barn was larger than it looked from the outside, with stalls along one wall and storage areas packed with tools, feed sacks, and equipment she didn't recognize. What are you doing? She asked. Stirrup strap broke last week. Been meaning to fix it. She watched as he threaded the leather through, his hands moving with the same easy confidence she'd seen earlier. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. You do all your own repairs? She asked. Have to. Nearest town's a half-day ride, and even then, the blacksmith charges too much. Is that where you got your supplies? Red Hollow? Yeah. He glanced up. You'll see it soon enough. We'll need to go in next week for provisions. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Will people know? About me, I mean. About what happened at the station. Silas's hand stilled. Probably. Town's small. Word travels. What will they think? He looked at her directly. Does it matter? It might. Silas set down the saddle and leaned back against the wall. People here talk. It's what they do when there's nothing else to do. They'll say what they're going to say, whether we like it or not. And what will they say? That I took in a woman the agency rejected, that you're too old, or too weak, or too something. His voice was flat, matter of fact. That I'm a fool for going against their judgment. Evelyn's throat tightened. And are you? A fool? Yes. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the saddle again and went back to work. Ask me in a year. It wasn't reassurance exactly, but it wasn't condemnation either. Evelyn watched him work, the steady rhythm of his hands, the crease of concentration between his brows. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Silas? Yeah? Why do you live out here so far from everything? He didn't look up. Same reason as anyone, I suppose. Land was cheap, work was hard but honest. Figured I could make something of myself. Have you? That made him pause. He looked around the barn at the tools and the hay and the worn saddle in his lap. I've made a living, that's something. Is it enough? Silas met her eyes. It was. Until recently. The weight of his words settled between them. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. The storm broke overhead with a crack of thunder so loud it shook the barn walls. Rain began to pour down, drumming against the roof like 1,000 fists. Evelyn flinched despite herself. Silas stood and walked to the door, peering out at the deluge. It'll pass, he said. Always does. Evelyn joined him, standing just behind his shoulder. The valley had disappeared behind a curtain of rain, the mountains lost entirely. Water poured off the barn roof in sheets, turning the yard into a muddy river. It's so loud, she said. That's the frontier. Everything's louder out here. Storms, silence, life. They stood together in the doorway, watching the rain fall. Evelyn felt the warmth of Silas beside her, solid and steady. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train, she felt something loosen in her chest. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe. The storm lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. By the time it finally broke, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled clean, scrubbed raw by the rain. Silas and Evelyn emerged from the barn, their boots squelching in the mud. The chickens had taken shelter under the coop, and Della was standing in her stall, ears flicking at the sound of dripping water. I'll fix us some supper, Evelyn said. I can help. You've been working all day. Let me do this. Silas wanted to argue, but he was tired and she had that look on her face again, the one that said she wasn't asking permission. All right, he said. They went inside. Evelyn moved around the kitchen with more confidence now, finding things without having to ask. She boiled more potatoes and fried the last of the salt pork, then made a simple gravy from the drippings. They ate at the table as the light faded outside. Silas watched her across the flickering lamplight, this woman who had appeared in his life like the storm, sudden, disruptive, impossible to ignore. Thank you, he said. Evelyn looked up. For what? For staying. She set down her fork. You keep thanking me. You don't have to. I do, though. You could have gotten on that train. You didn't. Neither did you, she said quietly. You could have let me leave. You didn't. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their choices hanging between them. Finally, Evelyn spoke. What happens now? Silas leaned back in his chair. We keep going, one day at a time, see where it leads. And if it leads nowhere? Then at least we tried. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's not much of a plan. It's the only one I've got. She laughed, a soft, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise even her. It was the first time Silas had heard her laugh, and it changed her whole face. All right, she said. One day at a time. That night, Evelyn lay in her small bed and listened to the sounds of the house. The creak of wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant call of an owl. She thought about Silas, asleep in the next room, thought about the way he'd stood up to Pritchard at the station, the quiet strength in his voice, thought about the risk he'd taken, bringing her here. She didn't know if this would work, didn't know if she was strong enough for this life, or if Silas would regret his choice. But she knew one thing, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Outside, the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with cold, distant light. Evelyn closed her eyes and let sleep take her. The next morning, Silas woke to the smell of coffee. He dressed and went to the kitchen, where Evelyn was already up, moving around the stove. She'd changed into a different dress. Still plain, still dark, but this one had sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Morning, she said without turning around. Morning. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and both of them pulled back quickly. Sleep all right? Silas asked. Better than the night before. Good. They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Silas would wake early, tend to the animals, ride out to check the fences and the cattle. Evelyn would work around the house, cleaning, cooking, mending clothes she found in a basket he'd long ignored. In the afternoons, they'd work together, side by side, on whatever needed doing. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was beginning to feel less heavy. On the fourth day, Silas taught her how to milk the cow, a cantankerous old beast named Bess who didn't like strangers. Evelyn's first attempt ended with a bucket of spilled milk and Bess's tail slapping her in the face. "You have to be firm," Silas said, trying not to smile. "I am being firm." "Firmer." Evelyn shot him a look, but she tried again. This time the milk came in thin streams, filling the bucket slowly. "There," Silas said. "See? You've got it." Evelyn looked down at the bucket, a mixture of pride and disbelief on her face. "I did it." "You did." She smiled, a real smile this time, wide and unguarded. Silas felt something shift in his chest. On the fifth day, they rode into town together. Silas had put it off as long as he could, but they were running low on supplies, and there was no avoiding it. He saddled Della and helped Evelyn climb up behind him. She sat closer this time, her hands resting lightly on his waist. The ride took just over an hour. As they crested the final ridge, Red Hollow came into view, the same dusty main street, the same handful of buildings. Evelyn's grip tightened. "It'll be fine," Silas said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. They rode down the main street and stopped in front of the general store. A few people were milling about. Mrs. Talbot, the preacher's wife, standing outside the church. Old Vernon Kemp sitting on a bench, whittling. Caleb Thorne loading supplies into a wagon. Every single one of them stopped what they were doing and stared. Silas dismounted and helped Evelyn down. Her face was pale, but she kept her chin up. "Stay close," he said quietly. They walked into the general store together. The store was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with dry goods, tools, fabric, and everything else a frontier town might need. Behind the counter stood Martin Greer, the owner, a portly man with thinning hair and a sharp eye for gossip. "Silas," he said, his gaze sliding immediately to Evelyn, "wasn't expecting to see you today." "Need supplies," Silas said curtly. Greer's eyes stayed on Evelyn. "And who's this?" "Evelyn Hart," Silas said. "She's staying at my place." The silence that followed was deafening. Greer's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "The Hart woman? The one the agency sent back?" Silas's jaw tightened. "She didn't go back." "I can see that." Greer leaned forward, his expression a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "Heard about what happened at the station. That true? You stopped her from leaving?" "That's right." "Well," Greer let out a low whistle. "That's something." Evelyn stepped forward. "Mr. Greer, if you have objections to my being here, I'd appreciate it if you'd say so directly rather than talking around me." Greer blinked, clearly taken aback. "No objection, ma'am. Just surprised is all." "I'm sure." Evelyn's voice was cool, polite. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have shopping to do." She turned and walked down one of the aisles, leaving both men staring after her. Silas allowed himself a small smile. "You heard the lady." Greer snorted. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that." "Yeah," Silas said. "She does." They gathered their supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, salt, a few cans of beans. Evelyn added a spool of thread and a packet of needles. Silas paid, and they loaded everything into saddlebags. As they stepped back outside, Mrs. Talbot was waiting. She was a thin, severe woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her expression pious and disapproving. "Mr. Boone," she said. "Mrs. Talbot." Her eyes flicked to Evelyn. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "This is Evelyn Hart," Silas said. "Evelyn, Mrs. Talbot." "Charmed," Evelyn said flatly. Mrs. Talbot's smile was thin. "I've heard about you, Miss Hart. The whole town has." "I'm sure. It's highly irregular, you know. A woman living with a man she's not married to. People talk." Evelyn met her gaze without flinching. "Let them." Mrs. Talbot's mouth tightened. "I'm simply concerned for your reputation, and Mr. Boone's." "That's kind of you," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But we're managing just fine. Silas stepped between them before the conversation could escalate further. We need to get going. Afternoon, Mrs. Talbot. He took Evelyn's arm and steered her toward Della. Behind them, he could feel Mrs. Talbot's eyes boring into their backs. They mounted up and rode out of town without looking back. It wasn't until they were well clear of Red Hollow that Evelyn spoke. That went well, she said dryly. Silas snorted. Could have been worse. How? She could have called the sheriff. Evelyn laughed despite herself. It was a bitter sound, but it was still a laugh. They rode in silence for a while, the town disappearing behind them. Finally, Evelyn said, They're going to keep talking, aren't they? Probably. Does it bother you? Silas thought about it. No. Does it bother you? Yes. She paused. But not enough to leave. Silas smiled. Good. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of red and gold. When they arrived, Evelyn slid down from the saddle and stood for a moment, looking at the house. What? Silas asked. She turned to him. This is home now, isn't it? If you want it to be. Evelyn nodded slowly. I think I do. Silas felt something warm settle in his chest. Then it is. They went inside together, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The weeks that followed their trip to town settled into something that almost resembled normal. Almost. Silas rose before dawn every morning, the habit too deeply ingrained to break even when sleep still pulled at him. He'd find Evelyn already in the kitchen more often than not, the coffee brewing, her hands busy with some task or another. They'd share breakfast in companionable silence, then split off to their separate work. But the separation never lasted long. One of them would always find a reason to check on the other, Silas needing help moving fence posts, Evelyn asking him to reach something on a high shelf she could have gotten herself with a stool. Neither of them acknowledged what they were doing. The ranch work intensified as autumn crept closer. The cattle needed to be moved to lower pastures before the first snow. The hay needed cutting and storing. The root vegetables in the small garden Evelyn had coaxed back to life needed harvesting before the ground froze solid. Evelyn learned fast, faster than Silas had expected. She'd watch him do something once, maybe twice, then attempt it herself with a determination that bordered on stubborn. Her hands blistered and bled from handling rope and wood and tools, but she never complained. She'd wrap them in torn strips of cloth and keep working. One afternoon, Silas found her in the garden, pulling up potatoes with dirt-streaked hands and a set jaw. A smear of mud crossed her cheek, and her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in dark strands around her face. You don't have to do all of them today, he said. She didn't look up. Weather's turning. You said so yourself this morning. I did, but that doesn't mean you have to kill yourself getting it done. Evelyn sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. I'm not killing myself. I'm working. There's a difference between working and punishing yourself. Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and defensive. What's that supposed to mean? Silas crouched down beside her, his knees cracking in protest. It means you don't have to prove anything to me, Evelyn. I already know you can work. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers digging into the dirt around another potato. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Mrs. Talbot came by yesterday. Silas went still. She what? While you were out checking the north fence, she rode up on that little mare of hers, knocked on the door like she was doing me some kind of favor. What did she want? Evelyn yanked the potato free with more force than necessary. To save my soul, apparently, and to remind me that respectable women don't live with men they're not married to. She had a whole speech prepared, very eloquent. Silas felt anger kindle in his chest. What did you tell her? That my soul was just fine, thank you, and that my living arrangements were none of her concern. Evelyn tossed the potato into the basket with the others. She didn't like that much. I'll bet she didn't. She said the town is watching us, that people are talking, that if I had any decency, I'd either marry you properly or leave before I dragged your reputation down with mine. Evelyn's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She said a woman my age should know better than to act like some desperate... She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. Silas's jaw tightened. She had no right. Maybe she did. Maybe she was right. Evelyn, maybe I'm dragging you down. Maybe the whole town does think you're a fool for taking me in. Maybe. Stop. Silas reached out and caught her wrist gently. Her hands were cold despite the work, the skin rough under his calloused fingers. Listen to me. I don't give a damn what Margaret Talbot thinks, or what anyone else in that town thinks. You're here because I asked you to be, because I wanted you to be. Evelyn's eyes searched his face. Why? What? Why did you want me to be here? Really? Not the story you told me at the station. The real reason. Silas let go of her wrist and sat back in the dirt beside her, not caring about the mud soaking into his pants. He looked out across the valley, at the mountains turning purple in the afternoon light. I was alone for a long time, he said finally. Told myself I liked it that way. That needing people made you weak, that the land was enough. He paused. Then that letter came. The first one, from the agency, saying they'd found a match for me. And for a few months, everything felt different, like maybe the land wasn't enough after all, like maybe I'd been lying to myself for years. He looked at her. When they sent the second letter, saying you weren't coming, saying you weren't suitable, something broke. Not because I knew you, I didn't, but because it felt like they were telling me I didn't deserve to want more, that I should just accept the loneliness and stop hoping for anything else. Evelyn's expression had softened, the defensiveness melting away. So when I saw you at that station, Silas continued, waiting to be sent back like damaged goods, I couldn't let it happen. Not to you, not to either of us. He picked up a clod of dirt and crumbled it between his fingers. Maybe that makes me selfish, I don't know, but it's the truth. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind moving through the grass and the distant call of a hawk. I was engaged once, Evelyn said quietly. Silas looked at her, surprised. His name was Thomas. I was 22. He was 25, worked as a clerk in my father's factory. She pulled another potato from the ground, her movements slow and deliberate. He was kind, steady. Everyone said we were a good match. He proposed. I said yes. We were supposed to marry the following spring. What happened? My father died. Factory accident. Thomas stayed for the funeral, held my hand through the whole thing. Then, 2 weeks later, he told me he'd been offered a position in Boston. Better pay, better prospects. He asked me to come with him. She paused. But my mother was sick, had been for months, though we didn't know how bad it was yet. I told Thomas I couldn't leave her, that we'd have to wait. Did he wait? Evelyn shook her head. He said he understood, that he'd write, that we'd figure it out. She smiled bitterly. He wrote twice. The second letter said he'd met someone else, someone whose family could help his career, someone without complications. Silas felt a surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something valuable. What's that? That people leave. That promises mean nothing when something better comes along. That being needed isn't the same as being wanted. She looked at him directly. So when you ask why I'm working myself to the bone, that's why. Because I need to be needed. Because if I'm useful, maybe I can stay. The honesty of it hit Silas like a fist to the chest. He saw himself in her words, the fear of being cast aside, of being found wanting, of building walls so high that loneliness became easier than risk. You don't have to earn your place here, Evelyn. Don't I? No. He said it firmly. You're not a hired hand, you're not... He stopped, unsure how to finish. What am I then? Silas didn't have an answer. Partner felt too presumptuous. Friend felt too small. The truth was somewhere in between, something he didn't have words for yet. You're someone I'm glad is here, he said finally. That's enough for now, isn't it? Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose it is. They went back to digging potatoes together, working side by side as the sun moved across the sky. And when Silas's hand accidentally brushed hers, reaching for the same plant, neither of them pulled away quite as quickly as they had before. October arrived with frost that painted the grass silver each morning. The cattle grew shaggy coats, and the chickens huddled together in the coop at night. Evelyn had taken to wearing a heavy shawl Silas had found in an old trunk. It had belonged to his mother, he said, though he didn't elaborate. They'd fallen into patterns. Evelyn would mend his shirts in the evenings while Silas carved new fence stakes or repaired tack. Sometimes she'd read aloud from her book of poetry, her voice soft in the lamplight. Silas pretended not to listen, but she could see the way his hands would still, the way his eyes would drift toward her. Other times, Silas would tell her about the land, how to read weather in the clouds, which plants the cattle avoided because they were poisonous, where the best fishing was in the creek that ran along the eastern boundary. Evelyn absorbed it all, filing away each piece of knowledge like it was precious. On a Thursday afternoon, Caleb Thorne rode up to the ranch unannounced. Silas was in the barn when Evelyn heard the horse approaching. She stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the low sun. Caleb sat tall in his saddle, a man clearly used to owning every space he entered. "Afternoon," he called out. "Silas around?" "In the barn." Evelyn didn't move from the porch. Caleb dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. He was younger than Silas, probably early 30s, with sandy hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from never being told no. His eyes raked over Evelyn with undisguised curiosity. "You must be the Hart woman. Heard you were still here." "Evelyn," she corrected. "Right, Evelyn." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Caleb Thorne. My ranch is just east of here, biggest spread in the valley." "Congratulations." His smile faltered slightly. Before he could respond, Silas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Caleb." His tone was neutral, but Evelyn could hear the wariness underneath. "What brings you by?" "Can't a neighbor stop in for a visit?" "You usually don't." Caleb laughed, but it sounded forced. "Fair enough. Actually, I came to talk about the winter grazing. Some of my cattle have been drifting onto your land near the creek. Thought we should discuss boundaries before snow makes it harder to move them." "Your cattle have been on my land since August," Silas said flatly. "This is the first I'm hearing you want to discuss it." "Well, I'm here now." The two men stared at each other. Evelyn could feel the tension thickening. "I'll put coffee on," she said, breaking the silence. "If you gentlemen want to talk, might as well do it inside." Caleb's eyes lit up. "That'd be mighty kind of you, ma'am." Silas shot her a look that clearly said, "Why are you helping him?" Evelyn ignored it and went inside. The men followed, boots heavy on the wooden floor. They sat at the kitchen table while Evelyn moved around the stove, preparing coffee and setting out what was left of the bread she'd baked that morning. "Nice setup you got here," Caleb said, looking around. His gaze lingered on Evelyn. "Real homey." "We manage," Silas said. "I'm sure you do." Caleb accepted a cup of coffee from Evelyn with a nod of thanks. "My wife's been asking about you, actually. Sarah. Says she hasn't seen you in town since—" He paused delicately. "Since you arrived." "I've been busy," Evelyn said. "Of course. Ranch work's demanding. Sarah knows that better than anyone. Still, she thought you might like some company. Female company. Gets lonely out here for women, I expect." Evelyn poured coffee for Silas and herself, then sat down at the table. "I'm not lonely." "No?" Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's good. That's real good. Some women can't handle the isolation. Sarah struggled at first, but she's adapted well. Having children helped, I think. Gives her purpose." Silas's jaw tightened. "Caleb, you said you wanted to talk about cattle." Right. But Caleb's attention was still on Evelyn. "You planning on staying long-term, then? I only ask because the agency usually doesn't— well, you know how it is." "I know exactly how it is," Evelyn said coolly. "And yes, I'm staying." "Married yet?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Silas set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "That's none of your business. Just asking. People wonder is all. Respectable folks tend to make things official." Caleb's smile had an edge to it now. "But I'm sure you have your reasons." "We do," Evelyn said before Silas could respond. "Our reasons are our own, just like your business is yours. Now, about those cattle, Silas mentioned they've been on his land since August. That's 2 months of grazing he's provided your herd, free of charge. Seems to me you owe him compensation." Caleb blinked, clearly not expecting her to engage. "Well, now, I wouldn't say—" "How many head?" Evelyn asked Silas. 20, give or take." 20 head for 2 months. Evelyn met Caleb's eyes. "Market rate for grazing is about 50 cents per head per month. That comes to $20. Seems fair?" Caleb's face darkened. Now hold on. Or, Evelyn continued, you could round up your cattle and move them back to your property, and we'll call it even. Your choice. The silence was absolute. Silas stared at Evelyn like he'd never seen her before. Caleb's friendly facade had completely dropped. You've got some nerve, Caleb said slowly. Coming in here, thinking you can tell me how to run my operation. I'm not telling you anything, Evelyn said calmly. I'm simply stating facts. Your cattle, Silas's land, 2 months. $20 or move them. That's business, not nerve. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Silas, are you going to let her talk to me like this? Silas leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She's not wrong. This is ridiculous. $20 or move the cattle, Caleb. Your choice. Silas's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. And for the record, what happens between Evelyn and me is our business. Not yours, not the town's, ours. Caleb's face had gone red. He grabbed his hat from the table and jammed it on his head. Fine. I'll move the damn cattle, but don't expect any favors from me when winter gets hard and you need help. Never have, Silas said. Caleb stormed out, slamming the door behind him. They heard him mount his horse and gallop off, hooves pounding against the hard earth. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... Don't apologize. Silas was looking at her with something like awe. Where did that come from? I don't know. He made me angry. I noticed. He was testing you, testing us, seeing if he could push. And you pushed back. Evelyn nodded, her hand shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Was that wrong? Silas laughed, a real genuine laugh that transformed his whole face. No, that was perfect. Did you see his face? Despite herself, Evelyn smiled. He wasn't expecting it. Nobody expects it. That's what makes it so good. Silas shook his head, still grinning. $20 for grazing rights. Where'd you learn that? My father ran a factory. I paid attention. She paused. Is he really not going to help if we need it? Caleb? Silas shrugged. He wasn't going to help anyway. Men like him only do favors when there's something in it for them. We're better off without his help. And his wife, Sarah? Nice enough, I suppose. Lonely, probably. Caleb's not the easiest man to live with. Silas's expression sobered. But if you do want company, female company, I won't stop you from making friends. Evelyn considered this. Maybe. Someday. Right now I'm fine with things the way they are. Their eyes met across the table. Something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. Me too, Silas said quietly. November brought the first real snow. Evelyn woke to a world transformed, everything white and silent, the valley buried under 6 inches of powder that sparkled in the early light. She stood at the window of her room, wrapped in a blanket, watching the way the snow had softened every harsh edge. Silas was already outside, breaking ice on the water troughs. She could see him moving through the white landscape, a dark figure against all that brightness. She dressed quickly and went to start breakfast. By the time Silas came inside, stamping snow from his boots, she had eggs frying and coffee ready. It's beautiful, she said. It's trouble. But his tone was gentle. This is early. If winter's coming hard, we need to be ready. What do we need to do? Over breakfast, Silas laid out the plan. The remaining hay needed to be moved closer to the barn. The firewood needed to be stacked nearer to the house. Every crack and gap in the walls needed to be stuffed with rags and mud to keep the heat in. The root cellar needed checking to make sure nothing would freeze. They worked all day, Evelyn matching Silas's pace despite the cold that made her fingers numb, and her breath come in white clouds. By evening, her muscles screamed and her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. Silas noticed her struggling to grip the last bundle of kindling. Without a word, he took it from her and carried it himself. Go inside, Tit, he said. Get warm. I can help. You have helped. Now go get warm before you freeze. Too tired to argue, Evelyn went inside. She built up the fire in the stove until the kitchen was almost too hot, then sat as close to it as she could, trying to thaw out. Silas came in 20 minutes later, his coat crusted with snow. He hung it by the door and moved to the stove, holding his hands out to the heat. "First snow's always the hardest," he said. "You get used to it." "Do you?" "Not really, but you learn to live with it." Evelyn looked at him, at this man who'd built a life in one of the harshest places she could imagine, who'd chosen isolation over compromise, who'd brought her into that isolation and somehow made it feel less like exile and more like sanctuary. "Silas?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." He glanced at her. "For what?" "For not sending me away when it got hard. Some men would have." "It's not hard having you here, Evelyn. It's—" He stopped, searching for words. "It's easier. Everything's easier with you here." The admission hung between them. Evelyn felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "I should start dinner," she said, standing quickly. "I'll help." They moved around each other in the small kitchen, the silence filled with things neither of them knew how to say. Evelyn sliced potatoes while Silas tended the meat. Their shoulders brushed as they worked. Neither of them moved away. That night, as Evelyn lay in her bed listening to the wind howl outside, she realized something had shifted. The house no longer felt like Silas's place where she was staying. It felt like theirs. The work wasn't his work that she helped with. It was their work, shared equally. She didn't know when it had happened, couldn't point to a single moment. But somewhere between the train station and the first snow, they'd become something more than two lonely people sharing a roof. She just didn't know what to call it yet. The snow didn't let up. 3 more storms hit in quick succession, each one burying the valley deeper. The world shrank to the space between the house and the barn, paths worn dark through the white. The cattle huddled together for warmth, and Silas had to break ice on the creek twice a day to keep them watered. Evelyn learned to read the weight of clouds, the smell of approaching weather. She learned to dress in layers, to keep her face covered against the wind that could strip skin in minutes. She learned that frontier winters weren't something you survived. They were something you endured, day by day, until spring finally remembered to come back. They were snowed in for 5 days straight during the worst of it. 5 days of nothing but the two of them, the crackling fire, and the endless white outside the windows. On the 3rd day, Silas taught her to play cards. They sat at the kitchen table with a battered deck he'd had for years, betting matches that they'd strike and toss into the fire. Evelyn turned out to be better at poker than either of them expected. "You're cheating," Silas accused after she won the 5th hand in a row. "I am not." "Then how—" "You have a tell." She laid down her cards. "Every time you have a good hand, your left eye twitches. Just a little." Silas touched his eye self-consciously. "It does not." "It does. You just did it." He stared at her, then burst out laughing. "How long have you known?" "Since the 2nd game." "And you didn't tell me?" "You didn't ask." Evelyn grinned, sweeping the pile of matches toward her. "That's 7 you owe the fire. You're ruthless." "I learned from the best." She started shuffling the cards again. "Another round?" They played until the lamp oil ran low and Evelyn's eyes started to droop. Silas won the last 3 hands, whether because Evelyn was tired or because he'd learned to control his tell, she wasn't sure. On the 4th day, the roof started leaking. Silas heard it first. A steady drip, drip, drip in the corner of the main room. He looked up and swore. "How bad?" Evelyn asked. "Bad enough." He grabbed a bucket and positioned it under the leak. "Snow's too heavy on the roof. I need to get up there and clear some of it off." "In this weather?" "Don't have a choice. If the roof caves, we've got bigger problems than a leak." Evelyn watched him bundle up, coat, gloves, hat pulled low, and head outside with a shovel. She stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching as he climbed onto the roof and started pushing snow off in heavy sheets. He'd been up there for maybe 20 minutes when his foot slipped. Evelyn's heart stopped as she saw him slide toward the edge, arms windmilling. At the last second, he caught the chimney and hauled himself back to safety. She was out the door before she could think, running through snow that came up to her knees. "Silas!" He looked down at her, surprised. "I'm fine. Get down from there. I need to finish. Now!" Something in her voice made him pause. He made his way carefully to the edge and climbed down, dropping the last few feet into the snow beside her. Evelyn grabbed his coat with both hands. "You could have died." "I didn't." "You could have." Her voice was shaking. "You could have fallen and broken your neck, and I would have been standing at the window watching, and there wouldn't have been anything I could do. Evelyn. He caught her wrist gently. I'm all right, see? I'm right here. She looked up at him, this man who'd become her whole world without her quite noticing, and felt something crack open inside her chest. I can't lose you, she whispered. Silas went very still. Snow fell between them, soft and silent. You won't, he said finally. You don't know that. No, but I'm not planning on going anywhere. They stood there in the snow, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite the cold. His hands were still on her wrists, hers still gripping his coat. Neither of them moved. We should go inside, Silas said quietly, before we both freeze. Evelyn nodded, but didn't let go. The roof can wait until the weather clears. Come on. He guided her back to the house, his hand on her elbow. Once inside, he insisted she sit by the fire while he made tea. Her hands were shaking, from cold or fear or something else entirely, she wasn't sure. Silas pressed a cup into her hands and sat down beside her. They didn't speak, just sat together, watching the fire, listening to the leak drip into the bucket. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment she'd seen him slip. The terror that had gripped her, the way her body had moved before her mind caught up, driven by a single desperate thought. Not him. Not him. Not him. When had he become so essential? When had the thought of losing him become unbearable? She knew the answer, even if she didn't want to admit it. It had been happening all along. Every shared meal, every quiet evening, every time he'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was more than just suitable or unsuitable, more than a name on a form, more than someone who could be sent away when she failed to measure up. He'd looked at her like she was necessary, and somewhere along the way, he'd become necessary too. The weather broke on the 6th day. The sun came out, brilliant and blinding on all that white. Silas went back up on the roof and finished clearing it while Evelyn watched from the ground, her heart in her throat the entire time. When he climbed down safely, she had to resist the urge to throw her arms around him. See, he said, told you I'd be fine. Don't do that to me again. Can't promise that. Ranch work's dangerous. Then be more careful. He studied her face, something shifting in his expression. I will. I promise I'll try. It was enough. That afternoon, while the sun was still high, Silas saddled Della and announced he was riding to the creek to check on the cattle. I'll come with you, Evelyn said. You don't have to. I want to. They rode together through the snow-covered valley, Evelyn sitting behind Silas the way she had that first night. But this time, her arms wrapped around his waist felt natural. Right. The cattle were bunched together in a sheltered spot near the creek, their breath steaming in the cold air. Silas counted them twice to make sure none had wandered off or died in the storm. All accounted for, he said finally. That's lucky. Is it always this hard? Evelyn asked. Winter? Sometimes worse, sometimes better. You never know until you're in it. He turned Della back toward home. But we made it through this one. We did. The word hung between them. We. They rode back as the sun started to set, painting the snow pink and gold. The mountains stood sharp against the sky, and for the first time since arriving, Evelyn understood why someone would choose this place, why someone would endure the isolation and the hardship and the brutal winters. Because when it was beautiful, it was worth it. And when you had someone to share it with, it was worth even more. That night over dinner, Silas cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said. Evelyn looked up from her plate. About what? About what Caleb said, about... He hesitated. About making things official. Her heart started beating faster. What do you mean? I mean, people are talking. They're going to keep talking. And as long as you're here without us being properly... He stopped, frustrated with himself. I'm making a mess of this. Take your time. Silas set down his fork and looked at her directly. I'm not asking because of what people think. I'm asking because I don't want you to feel like you're in some kind of uncertain position, like you could be sent away again if things don't work out. Silas, let me finish. He took a breath. I don't know what this is between us. I'm not good with words, but I know I don't want you to leave. I know I sleep better knowing you're in the next room. I know work's easier when we're doing it together. And I know that when I saw you at that station, it felt like, he paused, like finding something I didn't know I'd lost. Evelyn's throat tightened. So I'm asking, Silas continued, if you'd consider marrying me. Not because you have to, not because the town expects it, but because maybe we could build something real here, together. The firelight flickered between them. Outside, an owl called. Can I think about it? Evelyn asked quietly. Silas nodded, though she could see the disappointment flicker across his face. Of course. Take all the time you need. That night, Evelyn lay awake again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping her up. It was possibility. She thought about Thomas, about the promises he'd made and broken, about her sister's pitying looks, about the agency's rejection, about every time she'd been told she wasn't good enough, young enough, suitable enough. And then she thought about Silas, about the way he'd stood up to Pritchard without knowing her, about the quiet strength in his hands when he worked, about the way he'd taught her to read the weather and play cards and see the beauty in this hard land, about the way he'd never once made her feel like she had to earn her place. She thought about what it would mean to stay, to put down roots in this valley, to tie her life to his, officially and permanently. She thought about what it would mean to leave. The choice, she realized, wasn't as hard as she'd expected. She found him in the barn the next morning, working on a broken harness. The leather had cracked in the cold, and he was trying to splice it back together with careful, methodical stitches. Yes, she said. Silas looked up, confusion crossing his face. What? Yes. I'll marry you. The needle slipped from his fingers. He stared at her for a long moment, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. You're sure? I'm sure. He stood slowly, setting the harness aside. You don't have to decide right now. I meant what I said about taking time. I've had enough time. Evelyn stepped closer. I've had 34 years of time. I know what I want. And that's this? This place? Me? She met his eyes. Yes. Silas exhaled, and she saw the tension drain from his shoulders. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his. They were warm, despite the cold, rough with calluses, real. When? He asked. Whenever you want. Next week? We could ride into town, find the minister. Next week is fine. They stood there in the barn, holding hands like awkward teenagers, neither quite sure what came next. Finally, Silas laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. I didn't think you'd say yes, he admitted. Why not? Because you're smart, and marrying me isn't particularly smart. Evelyn squeezed his hands. Maybe I'm tired of being smart. Maybe I want to be happy instead. Something shifted in his expression, something tender and raw. He lifted one of her hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a chaste gesture, almost old-fashioned, but it made her breath catch anyway. I'm going to try, he said quietly, to make you happy. I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I'm going to try. That's all I ask. They stood there a moment longer, then Silas cleared his throat and stepped back, his ears slightly red. I should finish this harness, and I should start breakfast. Right. Neither of them moved. Evelyn smiled. This is going to take some getting used to. Yeah, Silas said, returning her smile. It is. What? The week passed in a blur of preparation. Silas rode into town alone one afternoon to speak with the minister and file the necessary paperwork. He came back looking grim. What happened? Evelyn asked. Nothing, just people have opinions. What kind of opinions? Silas hung his coat by the door. The minister wanted to make sure I understood what I was doing, that I wasn't being, and I quote, led astray by misguided compassion. Evelyn's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? That my reasons were my own, and if he didn't want to perform the ceremony, I'd find someone who would. Silas ran a hand through his hair. He backed down after that, said he'd do it Saturday afternoon. Did he say anything else? He suggested we have a proper engagement period, 6 months, maybe a year, so people could get used to the idea. Silas's voice was flat. I told him we'd be there Saturday at 2 o'clock and hung up before he could argue. Evelyn moved to the stove, suddenly needing something to do with her hands. Maybe he has a point. Maybe we are rushing. Are you having second thoughts? No, but everyone seems to think this is a mistake. Silas crossed the room and turned her to face him. Evelyn, look at me. She did. Do you want to marry me? Yes. Then that's all that matters. Not what the minister thinks. Not what the town thinks. Not what anyone thinks except us. His voice was firm. I'm done letting other people decide what's right for my life, aren't you? Evelyn thought about Pritchard at the train station, dismissing her with a word, about Mrs. Talbot's righteous condescension, about every person who'd ever looked at her and found her wanting. Yes, she said. I am. Good. Then we're getting married Saturday. They rode into town early Saturday afternoon, arriving with enough time to spare that Silas's nerves had started showing. He kept adjusting his collar, checking his pocket watch, glancing at Evelyn like he was afraid she might bolt. I'm not going anywhere, she said as they tied up outside the small church. I know? Do you? Silas managed a crooked smile. I'm working on it. The church was empty except for the minister, a thin man named Reverend Michaels with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of mild disapproval. He greeted them with stiff formality. Mr. Boone, Miss Hart. Reverend, Silas said, I must say, I'm surprised you went through with this. I thought perhaps, after some reflection, We're ready, Silas interrupted. Can we begin? Michaels pressed his lips together but nodded. Very well. Do you have witnesses? Silas and Evelyn looked at each other. They hadn't thought about witnesses. The church door opened before either could answer. Martin Greer from the general store stepped inside, followed by his wife, a plump woman with kind eyes named Constance. Hope we're not late, Greer said. Heard you two were making it official today. Silas blinked. How did you... Word travels. Greer shrugged. Figured you could use some friendly faces. If you'll have us. Evelyn felt an unexpected rush of gratitude. We'd be honored. Constance moved to stand beside Evelyn, giving her hand a quick squeeze. Don't mind the Reverend. He means well. He's just set in his ways. Michaels cleared his throat loudly. If we're all settled, shall we proceed? The ceremony was brief and impersonal. Michaels read from a worn book in a monotone voice, clearly performing a duty rather than celebrating a union. When he got to the vows, he didn't even look up. Silas Boone, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Silas's voice was steady. I do. Evelyn Hart, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Evelyn looked at Silas, at this man who'd chosen her when no one else had, who'd given her a place to belong, who'd asked for nothing except her willingness to try. I do. By the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. Michaels closed the book with a snap. You may kiss the bride. Silas hesitated, clearly unsure. Evelyn solved the problem by stepping forward and pressing a quick, chaste kiss to his lips. It was over before either of them had time to think about it. Congratulations, Michaels said, though he sounded like he was wishing them luck at a funeral. I'll prepare the certificate. Greer clapped Silas on the shoulder. Well done, Boone. You got yourself a good woman. I know, Silas said quietly. Constance embraced Evelyn warmly. You come by the store any time, you hear? I know how lonely it gets out there. A woman needs friends. Thank you, Evelyn managed. They signed the certificate, Evelyn Hart becoming Evelyn Boone with 3 strokes of a pen, and accepted awkward congratulations from the Greers. Michaels watched the whole proceeding with barely concealed disapproval. As they were leaving, the Reverend called out, Mrs. Boone? Evelyn turned. I hope, he said carefully, that you prove me wrong. It wasn't quite a blessing, but it wasn't quite a curse either. I intend to, Evelyn said. They rode back to the ranch in silence. The sun was setting by the time they crested the final ridge, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Silas helped Evelyn down from the horse, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at the house. Well, Silas said, we did it. We did. You're officially stuck with me now. Evelyn smiled. I suppose I am. They went inside. The house looked the same as it had that morning, same sparse furniture, same cold stove, same quiet emptiness waiting to be filled. But something had shifted. This wasn't just Silas's house anymore, or even a place where Evelyn was staying. This was theirs. Silas lit the lamp while Evelyn started a fire in the stove. They moved around each other with practiced ease, falling into the comfortable rhythms they'd developed over the past months. It should have felt momentous, this first evening as husband and wife, but instead it felt natural. Right. You hungry? Evelyn asked. Not particularly. Me neither. They ended up sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, neither quite sure what to do with themselves. The awkwardness from the barn a week ago had returned, amplified by the weight of what they'd just done. I can sleep in the barn tonight, Silas offered. If you want. Give you time to adjust. Evelyn looked at him, this man who'd just married her and was now offering to sleep in the barn. Silas, we're married. I know, but I don't want you to feel pressured. We can take things slow. How slow? As slow as you need. She reached across the table and took his hand. I don't need slow, I need honest. Can you give me that? Always. Then tell me what you want, not what you think I want to hear, what you actually want. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was low. I want you to stay. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here. I want to build something with you, not just the ranch, but a life. A real one. He looked up, meeting her eyes. And I want you to be happy, whatever that takes. What would make you happy? Having you here. That's enough. Just that? Just that. Evelyn stood, still holding his hand. Come on. Where? Somewhere we don't have to keep second-guessing each other. She led him to her room, her old room, she supposed, though the lines of ownership had blurred beyond recognition. They stood beside the narrow bed, hands still linked. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn admitted. Thomas and I we were engaged, but we never actually. I know. How? Just do. Silas stepped closer. We'll figure it out. Together. He kissed her then, properly this time, his hands gentle on her face. It was nothing like the awkward peck at the church. It was tentative and searching, both of them learning the shape and rhythm of each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. Is this all right? He asked. Yes. You're sure? Silas, if you ask me one more time if I'm sure, I'm going to throw something at you. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Noted. They took their time, fumbling through buttons and laces with nervous hands. There was nothing smooth or practiced about it, just two people who'd spent their lives alone trying to figure out how to not be alone anymore. Later, lying in the dark with Silas's arm around her waist, Evelyn felt something settle inside her chest, a sense of belonging that had eluded her for 34 years. You awake? Silas murmured. Yeah, thank you. She turned in his arms. For what? For saying yes. For staying. For giving this a chance. Evelyn pressed a kiss to his shoulder. Thank you for asking. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in a bed that had been made for one, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them felt alone. Winter deepened its grip on the valley. December brought storms that lasted days, burying the ranch under snow that came up to the windows. January was worse, bitter cold that cracked trees and froze water solid within minutes of being pumped. But inside the house, a different kind of warmth had taken hold. Silas and Evelyn fell into married life with the same practical approach they brought to everything else. They shared the work, the meals, the long dark evenings by the fire. They shared the bed without fanfare or awkwardness, their bodies learning each other's rhythms and needs. But it wasn't all easy. One morning in late January, Evelyn woke to find Silas already gone. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, expecting to find him at the table. Instead, she found a cold stove and an empty house. She pulled on her coat and boots and went outside. The sun was barely up, the air so cold it hurt to breathe. She found him in the barn, standing motionless in front of an empty stall. Silas? He didn't turn around. Belle's gone. Belle was the oldest cow in the herd, a gentle creature that had been with Silas since he'd first started the ranch. Evelyn stepped closer and saw what he was looking at, the cow lying on her side in the straw, perfectly still. I'm sorry, she said quietly. She was 15. That's old for a cow. His voice was flat. Knew it was coming. That doesn't make it easier. No. Silas finally turned to look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from cold or grief, she couldn't tell. She was the first one I bought, used money I'd saved for 3 years. Everyone said I was a fool, that she was too old, that I should buy younger stock. But I liked her. Evelyn moved to stand beside him. What do you need? I need to bury her before the ground freezes any harder. He looked back at the cow. Going to take most of the day. Then we'd better get started. Evelyn, you don't have to. I know, but I'm going to anyway. They spent the morning digging a hole in the frozen earth. It was brutal work. The ground was like iron, yielding only inches at a time. Evelyn's hands blistered within the first hour, then went numb. Silas worked in grim silence, his jaw set. By noon, they had a hole barely deep enough. Silas rigged a rope system to drag Belle's body from the barn to the grave. It took both of them pulling with everything they had. When it was done, Silas stood at the edge of the hole, looking down at the cow that had been with him longer than any living thing. Seems like there should be words, he said finally. Then say them. Silas was quiet for a long moment. You were a good cow, Belle. Better than I deserved. Thank you for... His voice cracked. He cleared his throat roughly. Thank you for everything. He grabbed the shovel and started filling in the hole. Evelyn helped, working until her arms shook and her breath came in ragged gasps. When the last of the dirt was tamped down, Silas drove a stake into the ground to mark the spot. They walked back to the house in silence. Inside, Evelyn started a fire while Silas sat at the table, staring at nothing. She was just a cow, he said finally. Shouldn't hurt this much. Evelyn knelt beside his chair. She wasn't just a cow. She was a part of your life, of everything you built here. It's all right to grieve her. I've lost animals before. It's part of ranching. That doesn't mean it stops hurting. Silas looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion in his face, not just from the physical work, but from years of facing these losses alone, of having no one to share the burden with. I'm glad you were here, he said quietly. So am I. That night they lay in bed, Silas curled around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Evelyn held his hand against her chest, feeling his breath against her neck. My father used to say that loving anything on the frontier is a fool's errand, Silas murmured, because the frontier takes everything eventually. Do you believe that? I used to. Now I don't know. He pressed his face into her hair. I love this place. And I love... He stopped. Evelyn's heart stuttered. What? Nothing. Never mind. Silas, go to sleep, Evelyn. She wanted to push, to make him finish that sentence, but something in his voice told her he wasn't ready, so she waited. February brought a brief thaw that turned the snow to slush and filled the air with false promises of spring. Evelyn took advantage of the break in the weather to wash everything in the house, linens, curtains, clothes that had been worn too many times without proper cleaning. She was hanging sheets on the line outside when she heard a wagon approaching. She turned to see Sarah Thorne driving up the path, alone. Evelyn's first instinct was to go inside and pretend she hadn't seen her, but Sarah had already spotted her and was waving. There was nothing to do but wave back. Sarah climbed down from the wagon with surprising grace, given her obvious pregnancy. She was further along than Evelyn had realized. 6 months, maybe 7. Mrs. Boone, Sarah called out, I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Evelyn lied. Though I should warn you, I'm not much for socializing. Sarah laughed, a bright, genuine sound. Neither am I usually, but I've been going stir-crazy in that house, and I thought maybe you might like some company, woman to woman. Up close, Sarah was younger than Evelyn had expected, mid-20s with blonde hair and a round, pleasant face. Nothing like the judgmental society wife Evelyn had imagined based on Caleb's arrogance. Would you like some coffee? Evelyn asked. I'd love some. They went inside. Evelyn poured coffee while Sarah settled herself at the table with visible relief, one hand on her swollen belly. How far along? Evelyn asked. 7 months? Though it feels like 7 years. Sarah sipped her coffee gratefully. First child. Caleb's thrilled. I'm terrified. That seems natural. Does it? Everyone keeps telling me it'll be fine, that women have been doing this forever, that I'm young and strong. Sarah set down her cup. But none of that stops me from being scared. Evelyn sat across from her. I think being scared means you understand what you're about to do. That's not particularly comforting. No, but it's honest. Sarah smiled. I like that. Everyone's so busy being reassuring, they forget to be honest. She paused. Caleb told me what happened when he came by, about the cattle and the grazing fees. He was furious. I'm sorry if I caused trouble. Don't be. He needed someone to stand up to him. I love my husband, but he's used to getting his way. Sarah's expression turned rueful. When we married, I thought I'd be a partner. Turns out he wanted a decoration, someone to keep the house and raise the children and not have opinions. And you have opinions. So many opinions. Sarah laughed again, but this time it sounded tired. Most of which I keep to myself because it's easier than fighting. Evelyn recognized the exhaustion in her voice, the slow erosion of self that came from constantly bending to someone else's will. Why did you really come here, Sarah? The younger woman looked down at her coffee. Because I heard you got married, and I wanted to see if the rumors were true. What rumors? That you and Silas are actually happy, that you chose each other, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Sarah met her eyes. Is it true? Evelyn thought about lying. It would be easier. But Sarah had asked for honesty. Yes, she said, it's true. How? How what? How did you make it work? Everyone said you were too old, that you'd been rejected by the agency, that Silas was crazy for taking you in. But you're still here. And when I drove up and saw you hanging laundry, you looked, Sarah struggled for words, content, like you actually want to be here. I do want to be here. Why? Evelyn considered the question. Because Silas has never tried to make me into something I'm not. He sees me, really sees me, and he's never asked me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. We work together. We decide things together. I'm not just here to serve a purpose. I'm here because I belong here. Sarah's eyes had filled with tears. That sounds wonderful. It is, most of the time. Other times it's hard and cold and exhausting, but it's ours. We built it together. Caleb would never... Sarah stopped herself. I shouldn't speak ill of my husband. But you want to. Yes. The word came out like a confession. I want to say that he doesn't listen, that he makes decisions without asking me, that sometimes I feel like I'm just part of the property, but saying it out loud feels like betrayal. It's not betrayal to want to be treated like a person. Sarah wiped her eyes. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's possible, if both people want it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah straightened, composing herself. I should go. Caleb doesn't know I came, and if he finds out, well, he won't be pleased. You don't have to tell him. He'll find out. He always does. Sarah stood, smoothing down her dress. Thank you for the coffee and for the honesty. Come back any time, Evelyn heard herself say. If you need to talk, or just to sit somewhere you don't have to pretend. Sarah's smile was grateful. I might take you up on that. Evelyn walked her to the wagon and helped her climb up. As Sarah took the reins, she looked down at Evelyn. You're lucky, you know, to have found what you have with Silas. I know. Don't take it for granted. I won't. Sarah drove away, leaving Evelyn standing in the yard. She went back to hanging laundry, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about Sarah, trapped in a marriage that diminished her. She thought about her own marriage, still so new and uncertain. She thought about the difference between being needed and being wanted, between obligation and choice. When Silas came back from checking the cattle that evening, Evelyn met him at the door. Sarah Thorne came by today. Silas's eyebrows rose. Caleb's wife? What did she want? To talk. Evelyn helped him out of his coat. She's lonely, I think, and maybe a little lost. That's rough. Yes. Evelyn hesitated. Silas, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me? He went very still. No. Why would you ask that? Because sometimes I worry that you felt obligated, that you married me out of some misguided sense of duty, and now you're stuck with a woman you never really wanted. Silas cupped her face in his hands. Listen to me. I married you because I wanted to, not because I had to, not because the town expected it, because every day with you is better than any day I had before you. Do you understand? I'm trying to. Then try harder, because I'm not good at saying these things, and I need you to believe me when I do. He pressed his forehead against hers. You're not something I'm stuck with, Evelyn. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Her throat tightened. You mean that? Every word. She kissed him then, pouring into it all the words she didn't know how to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas smiled. What was that for? For being exactly who you are. That night lying in the dark, Silas finally finished the sentence he'd started weeks ago. I love you, he said quietly. I think I have for a while. I just didn't know how to say it. Evelyn turned to face him. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Evelyn Boone. She kissed him softly. I love you too. And for the first time in either of their lives, those words meant exactly what they were supposed to mean. March arrived with mud and melting snow. The world turned brown and soggy, the yard a mess of churned earth and half-frozen puddles. But underneath the ugly transition, Evelyn could feel spring gathering itself. The chickens started laying more eggs. The cattle began to move more freely, no longer huddled against the cold. And one morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of birds she hadn't heard in months. Spring's coming, Silas said over breakfast. How can you tell? The air's different, softer. Evelyn smiled. You and your weather predictions. Haven't been wrong yet. No, she agreed. You haven't. They spent the morning planning the garden. What to plant, where to plant it, how much seed they'd need. Silas had ordered supplies from a catalog, and they were due to arrive any day. I was thinking, he said, tracing patterns in the dirt floor with his boot. Maybe this year we expand, plant more than we need, sell the extra in town. That's a good idea? And maybe, he hesitated, maybe we think about getting a few more cattle, building up the herd. Planning for the future? Something like that. He looked at her. Unless you think it's too soon. I think it's exactly the right time. They were still discussing plans when they heard a wagon approaching. Silas went to the window and frowned. It's Greer, from the store. They went outside to meet him. Martin Greer climbed down from his wagon, his expression serious. Silas, Evelyn, sorry to drop by unannounced, but I thought you should know. There's talk in town. Silas's jaw tightened. What kind of talk? The bad kind. Some folks are saying you two aren't really married, that you made the whole thing up to quiet the gossip. Greer looked uncomfortable. Michaels isn't helping. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that he only performed the ceremony under duress, that he has concerns about the legitimacy of the union. Evelyn felt cold fury settle in her stomach. We have a certificate. We signed it. There were witnesses. I know. Constance and I were there. But Michaels is saying the whole thing was irregular, that proper protocols weren't followed. Greer shook his head. I'm sorry. I know it's nonsense, but people are listening. Let them listen, Silas said flatly. We know the truth. The truth doesn't always matter when people want to believe something else. Greer pulled an envelope from his coat. I brought your certificate. Thought you should keep it somewhere safe, in case anyone tries to challenge it. Silas took the envelope. Thanks, Martin. There's more. Greer glanced at Evelyn. Mrs. Talbot's been organizing, getting women together to pray for your souls. She's convinced you're living in sin and leading Silas astray. Evelyn laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Of course she is. I'd ignore it if I were you. Talbot's always looking for something to be righteous about. But I wanted you to know what you're dealing with. Greer climbed back onto his wagon. For what it's worth, Constance and I think you two are good together. Don't let the gossips convince you otherwise. After he left, Silas and Evelyn stood in the yard, the certificate clutched in Silas's hand. We should have expected this, Evelyn said. Doesn't make it any easier. No. Silas looked at her. What do you want to do? What can we do? We can't force them to accept us. We could leave. Go somewhere else. Start over where no one knows us. Evelyn considered it. The idea of running, of starting fresh in a place without judgment or whispers. It was tempting, but running meant letting them win, meant admitting that maybe they were right to question, right to doubt. No, she said firmly, we're not leaving. This is our home. We built this. They don't get to drive us out. Silas's expression shifted to something like pride. You're sure? I'm sure. Let them talk. Let Mrs. Talbot pray. We know the truth, that has to be enough. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Have I mentioned that I love you? Once or twice? Good, because I do. They went back inside, united against a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. But they'd faced worse than gossip. They'd faced winter and isolation and their own doubts. They could face this too, together. Spring came slowly, grudgingly, like it was testing whether the valley deserved it. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing dead grass and muddy earth. But with each passing day, the world turned a little greener, a little warmer, a little more alive. Evelyn planted the garden in early April, her hands working the cold soil while Silas repaired fence posts that had rotted over winter. They worked side by side most days now, the division between his work and hers blurring until it was just their work, shared equally. The gossip in town hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified. Mrs. Talbot's prayer group had grown to include half a dozen women, all of them convinced that Evelyn and Silas were living examples of moral decay. Reverend Michaels had started preaching sermons about the sanctity of proper marriage, though he never mentioned them by name. He didn't have to. But something unexpected had happened. For every person who whispered behind their hands, there was someone else who nodded in quiet approval. Martin and Constance Greer made a point of greeting them warmly whenever they came to town. The blacksmith, a gruff man named Otto, had stopped Silas one afternoon to say he admired a man who made his own choices. Even old Vernon Kemp, who spent most of his time whittling on the bench outside the saloon, had muttered something about how the world needed more people willing to stand up for what they wanted. The valley was choosing sides, and Silas and Evelyn were discovering they had more allies than they'd thought. One morning in late April, Sarah Thorne showed up at the ranch again. This time she wasn't alone. She brought another woman, younger, barely 20, with red hair and freckles and a nervous energy that filled the whole kitchen. "This is Emma," Sarah said. "Emma Pritchard. She's Howard Pritchard's niece." Evelyn nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Pritchard's niece?" Emma flushed. "I know, I'm sorry. I know what my uncle did to you. It was wrong." "Why are you here?" "Because I need to talk to someone who understands." Emma's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm engaged. To a man in Denver my uncle arranged for me. He's 43, I'm 20. I've never met him, but Uncle Howard says it's a good match, that I should be grateful." Evelyn's stomach turned. "And you're not?" "I'm terrified." Emma's voice cracked. "I don't want to marry a stranger. I don't want to be sent away to make someone else happy. But Uncle Howard says I don't have a choice, that this is what women do. We go where we're sent, and we make the best of it." Sarah reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "I told her about you, about how you refused to be sent back, about how you made your own choice." Evelyn sat down across from Emma. "What do you want me to tell you?" "I don't know. That it's possible? That I can say no?" Emma looked up, her eyes desperate. "Everyone keeps telling me I'm being foolish, that I should be happy someone wants to marry me at all, but I don't feel happy. I feel like I'm being sold." The words hit too close to home. Evelyn remembered standing on that train platform, waiting to be shipped back like defective merchandise. Remembered the weight of other people's expectations crushing down on her. "You can say no," Evelyn said firmly. "It won't be easy. People will judge you. They'll say you're selfish or foolish or ungrateful. But you can say no." "And then what? Where do I go? What do I do?" "I don't know. That's the hard part. Saying no means figuring out your own path instead of following someone else's." Evelyn leaned forward. "But I can tell you this, living a life you chose, even if it's hard, is better than living a life someone else chose for you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared." "That's normal. I was scared too." "But you had Silas. You had someone waiting for you." "No, I didn't. I had a man I'd never met who stopped me from getting on a train. I had no idea if it would work out. I just knew I couldn't get back on that train and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Evelyn's voice softened. You're the only one who can decide what you can live with. But whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision, not your uncle's, not society's, yours. Sarah and Emma left an hour later, Emma still uncertain, but looking slightly less broken. After they'd gone, Silas came in from the barn and found Evelyn sitting at the table, staring at nothing. You all right? He asked. I don't know, that girl, Emma. She reminded me of myself a year ago. You helped her. Did I? All I did was tell her she could choose. I didn't give her any answers. Silas sat down beside her. Sometimes that's the most important thing you can give someone. Permission to choose. Evelyn looked at him. Is that what you gave me? At the train station? I tried to. I wanted you to know you had options. That you weren't just cargo being sent back. He reached for her hand. Did it work? She laced her fingers through his. Yes, it worked. Oh, May brought warmth that finally felt real. The garden began to sprout, tentative green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. Evelyn checked on them every morning, marveling at the fact that things she'd planted were actually growing. The cattle had calved, adding 6 new members to the herd. Silas spent long days moving them to better grazing, coming home exhausted but satisfied. The ranch was thriving in a way it hadn't in years, and both of them knew it was because there were 2 of them now, sharing the burden. One afternoon, a stranger rode up to the house. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with dusty clothes and a nervous expression. Evelyn met him on the porch. Help you? She asked. I'm looking for Mrs. Boone, Evelyn Boone. That's me. The young man dismounted and pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. I have a letter for you, from Philadelphia. Evelyn's heart sank. She knew that handwriting. Margaret. She paid the courier and took the letter inside. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter was brief and cutting, exactly like her sister. Evelyn, I heard through mutual acquaintances that you married some rancher out west after being rejected by the matrimonial agency. I must say I'm not surprised. You always did have a talent for making questionable decisions. Mother would be horrified to know you're living out there in the wilderness with a man you barely know. But then again, Mother had standards. I hope you're happy with your choice, though I suspect in a few years you'll realize what you've thrown away. Respectability, family, any chance at a decent life. Don't bother writing back. We have nothing more to say to each other. Margaret Evelyn read it twice, feeling the familiar sting of her sister's disapproval. Then she walked to the stove and held the letter over the flame until it caught fire. She dropped it into the firebox and watched it burn. Silas found her standing there, staring at the ashes. What was that? A letter from my sister, telling me what a disappointment I am. Evelyn? She's right, in a way. I did throw away everything she values. Respectability, family connections, the chance to live a safe, predictable life. Evelyn turned to face him. And I don't regret a single second of it. Silas pulled her into his arms. Good, because I'd hate to think you were settling. She laughed against his chest. Settling? I'm living in the middle of nowhere with a man who talks to cows and thinks coffee counts as a meal. Hey, coffee's nutritious. No, it's not. Tastes good, though. She looked up at him, this stubborn, difficult, wonderful man who'd given her a life she never knew she wanted. I love you. I love you too. He kissed her forehead. Even if you do judge my nutritional choices. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn realized she'd stopped thinking about Philadelphia, about her old life, her old disappointments, the person she used to be. That version of herself felt like a stranger now, someone she'd left behind on a train platform months ago. She was Evelyn Boone now, ranch wife, partner, woman who'd chosen her own path and walked it without apology, and she liked who she'd become. Basset. June arrived with heat that baked the valley and turned the grass gold. The garden was producing now, lettuce and radishes and early peas. Evelyn spent her mornings harvesting, her afternoons preserving what they couldn't eat fresh. Sarah Thorne became a regular visitor, often bringing Emma with her. The 3 women would sit in Evelyn's kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah was getting close to her time, the baby due any day now. Emma had broken off her engagement, much to Howard Pritchard's fury, and was living with the Greers while she figured out her next steps. "Uncle Howard won't speak to me," Emma said one afternoon. "He says I've disgraced the family name, that no decent man will want me now that I've proven myself unreliable." "Then you'll find an indecent man," Evelyn said. "They're more fun anyway." Sarah laughed so hard she had to hold her belly. "Don't make me laugh. This baby's already sitting on my bladder." "How's Caleb handling things?" Evelyn asked. Sarah's expression darkened. "He's furious that I keep coming here, says you're a bad influence, that you're filling my head with inappropriate ideas about marriage." "What kind of inappropriate ideas?" "That wives should have opinions, that we should be partners, not property." Sarah's voice was bitter. "He actually said that out loud last week, called me his property, like I was a horse or a plow." Emma reached for her hand. "What did you do?" "I told him if that's how he sees me, he can sleep in the barn with the rest of his livestock." Sarah smiled grimly. "He didn't like that much." "Good for you," Evelyn said. "Was it? I don't know anymore. Sometimes I think I should just accept things the way they are. Stop fighting. It would be easier." "Easier for who?" Evelyn asked. "Not for you. You'd just disappear a little more every day until there was nothing left of who you used to be. Maybe that's what being married means." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "That's what being trapped means. Marriage should make you more yourself, not less." Sarah looked at her with something like envy. "How did you get so sure about everything?" "I'm not sure about anything. I'm just tired of pretending to be smaller than I am to make other people comfortable." The conversation stayed with Evelyn after Sarah and Emma left. She thought about the different paths women took. Sarah, stuck in a marriage that diminished her. Emma, brave enough to say no, but uncertain what came next. Herself, having found something rare and precious, but knowing how easily it could have gone wrong. That night, she told Silas about the conversation. "Sarah's miserable," she said, "and there's nothing I can do to help her." "You're already helping. You're showing her there's another way." "But showing isn't enough. She has to choose it for herself." "And she might not. Some people would rather stay in a bad situation than face the uncertainty of leaving." Silas's voice was sad. "It's not fair, but it's true." "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to know that you can't save people who don't want to be saved." Evelyn leaned against him. "I hate that you're right." "Me too." July brought news that rippled through the valley like a stone dropped in still water. Sarah Thorne had given birth to a son, but the delivery had been difficult. She'd lost a lot of blood. The doctor had been called from 2 towns over, and for 3 days no one was sure if she'd survive. Evelyn heard the news from Constance Greer and immediately wanted to go to her, but Silas stopped her. "Caleb won't let you in. You know that." "I don't care what Caleb wants. Sarah's my friend, and she's his wife. He controls who sees her." Silas's face was grim. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, but that's the way it is." Evelyn paced the kitchen like a caged animal, furious and helpless. She sent notes through the Greers asking about Sarah's condition, begging to be allowed to visit. All of them went unanswered. On the 4th day, Emma showed up at the ranch. "She's asking for you," Emma said without preamble. "Sarah, she won't rest until she sees you. The doctor says she needs to stay calm, but she keeps crying, keeps asking. Caleb finally agreed to let you come, but only for a few minutes." Evelyn was already grabbing her shawl. "Let's go." The Thorne Ranch was larger and more prosperous than Silas's, but it felt cold and unwelcoming. Caleb met them at the door, his face haggard. 10 minutes, he said, "and don't upset her." Evelyn pushed past him without answering. Sarah's room was dim, curtains drawn against the July heat. She lay in bed, so pale she almost blended with the sheets. The baby slept in a cradle beside her, tiny and red-faced. "Evelyn," Sarah whispered. Evelyn pulled a chair close and took Sarah's hand. It was cold despite the heat. "I'm here. I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't." "No. But I came close." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "And all I could think was that I'd wasted my whole life trying to be what everyone else wanted, that I'd never once done what I wanted." "Sarah, let me finish, please." Sarah gripped Evelyn's hand tighter. "You were right. About everything. Marriage shouldn't make you disappear. It shouldn't make you feel like you're less than you were. And I've been disappearing for 3 years. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I know I can't keep living like this. I can't raise my son to think this is what love looks like. Sarah's voice strengthened. I want him to grow up seeing parents who respect each other, who choose each other every day, like you and Silas. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. We're not perfect. No, but you're real, and that's better than perfect. The door opened and Caleb stepped in. Time's up. Evelyn stood but didn't let go of Sarah's hand. I'll come back. As soon as you're strong enough for visitors. Thank you, Sarah whispered, for showing me it was possible. Outside, Caleb grabbed Evelyn's arm. What did you say to her? Nothing she didn't already know. She was fine before she met you, obedient, compliant. Now she's got ideas. Good, Evelyn cut him off. Maybe those ideas will save her life. Because the woman you married is dying a little more every day, and if you can't see that, you're blind. She yanked her arm free and walked away, leaving Caleb standing in the yard, his face twisted with impotent rage. Emma drove her home, both of them silent. When they reached the ranch, Emma finally spoke. Do you think she'll leave him? I don't know. I hope so, but that's her choice to make. It's hard, isn't it? Choosing yourself over what everyone expects. Evelyn looked at this young woman who'd broken her engagement and faced her uncle's wrath rather than marry a stranger. You already know it is, but you did it anyway. I did, and I'm terrified, but I'm also... Emma searched for words. Free. For the first time in my life, I'm free. Hold on to that feeling. When things get hard, remember why you chose this. Emma nodded and drove away. Evelyn found Silas in the barn and without a word walked into his arms. Rough day? He asked. Very. Want to talk about it? Not yet. Right now I just want to be here. With you. In this life we built. He held her close and she felt the solid reality of him. The warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the calluses on his hands from years of work. This was real. This was worth fighting for. This was home. August was a month of hard work and harder heat. The hay needed cutting and storing before the first frost. The garden needed constant tending. The cattle needed moving to higher pastures to escape the worst of the heat. Evelyn worked alongside Silas from dawn until well past dark, her body aching, but her spirit content. They'd hired a hand for the harvest, a quiet man named Joseph, who kept to himself and worked hard. With 3 of them working, they got more done in a week than Silas usually managed in a month. One evening, after Joseph had retired to the small bunkhouse Silas had hastily built, Evelyn and Silas sat on the porch watching the sun set. We did good this year, Silas said. We did. Garden produced more than expected. Cattle are healthy. Got enough hay stored to get through 2 winters if we need to. Are you leading somewhere with this? Silas was quiet for a moment. I was thinking maybe we could expand next year, get more land, build a proper barn, maybe hire permanent help instead of seasonal. That sounds like you're planning long term. I am. He looked at her. Unless you're not. Evelyn took his hand. I'm planning as long term as you are. Good. Because I was also thinking... He stopped, uncharacteristically hesitant. What? About children. Maybe. If you wanted. The words came out in a rush. I know we haven't talked about it, and I know we're both getting older, Evelyn finished. You can say it. I wasn't going to put it like that. But it's true. I'm 35. If we're going to have children, it should probably be sooner rather than later. She paused. Is that what you want? I want whatever future you want. That's not an answer, Silas. He sighed. Yes, I want children. I want to build something that lasts beyond just us, but only if you want it too. Evelyn thought about Sarah, about the difficult birth and the near-death experience, thought about her own age, the risks that came with it, thought about the life they'd built, and whether there was room in it for more. I want it, she said finally. I'm terrified, but I want it. Silas pulled her close. We'll figure it out, like we figured out everything else. Together? Always together. September brought news that shocked the valley. Sarah Thorne had left Caleb. She'd packed her things, taken her son, and moved in with her parents 2 counties over. Caleb had tried to stop her, had threatened legal action, had even gone to the sheriff. But Sarah's father was a wealthy man with lawyers, and when they got involved, Caleb backed down. The town was divided. Half the population thought Sarah was a scandalous woman who'd abandoned her marriage vows. The other half quietly supported her, though few said so out loud. Mrs. Talbot organized a special prayer service for Sarah's soul. Evelyn didn't attend. Instead, she received a letter a week later. Sarah's handwriting was shaky, but determined. Dear Evelyn, I did it. I left. I'm terrified, and everyone thinks I'm a monster, but I left. My son will grow up knowing his mother chose dignity over comfort. He'll grow up seeing what it looks like to stand up for yourself. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for being the example I needed. I don't know what comes next, but I know I made the right choice. Your friend Sarah Evelyn showed the letter to Silas that evening. She's brave, he said. She is. Braver than I was. How do you figure? She had something to lose and left anyway. When I stayed with you, I had nothing to lose. The agency had already rejected me. The world had already written me off. Staying was actually the safer choice. Silas shook his head. You're wrong. You had everything to lose. Your pride, your independence, the ability to leave if things went bad. Every day you stay, you're choosing to be here. That's not safe. That's brave. Evelyn looked at this man who understood her better than she understood herself. When did you get so good with words? I've been practicing. Wanted to make sure you knew, he paused, that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. That every day with you is better than any day before you. That I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful anyway. Her eyes stung. Silas, I'm not done. I also wanted to say that I see you. All of you. The stubborn parts and the scared parts and the parts you try to hide. And I love all of it. Every piece. Evelyn kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the gesture. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead against his. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone. Even though I talk to cows? Especially because you talk to cows. He laughed and pulled her closer. Outside, the first stars were appearing, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the smell of dinner and the sound of their breathing. This was happiness, Evelyn realized. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of someone to face it with. Not perfection, but partnership. Not settling, but choosing every single day. Well, winter came early that year, snow falling in October and not letting up until March. It was the hardest winter the valley had seen in a decade. Cattle died. Supplies ran low. The isolation pressed down like a weight, but Silas and Evelyn weathered it together. They played cards by firelight and read books aloud and made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside. They argued sometimes about small things, about whose turn it was to break the ice on the water trough, about whether they could afford to hire more help come spring. But they always worked it out, always came back to each other. In February, Evelyn realized she was pregnant. She waited a week to be sure, then told Silas over breakfast. He dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the floor, coffee spreading in a dark pool. He couldn't seem to finish a sentence. Yes. Silas stood so abruptly his chair fell over. He crossed to her side of the table and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. Are you happy? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. I'm terrified. But yes, I'm happy. Me too. They stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, holding each other like lifelines. Spring arrived with a vengeance, melting snow flooding the creek and turning the valley into a temporary lake. But the water receded, the sun came out, and the world turned green again. Evelyn's pregnancy progressed without major complications, though the morning sickness was brutal. Silas hovered like a nervous bird, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was all right, if he should ride for the doctor. I'm pregnant, not dying, she told him one morning after he'd interrupted her gardening for the third time to ask how she felt. I know, but Sarah nearly died, and you're older, and I'm fine. The doctor said everything looks good. Stop worrying. Can't help it. She stood and kissed him, tasting coffee and concern. I know, but try anyway. Word of the pregnancy spread through the valley. The response was mixed. Some people sent congratulations. Others sent dire warnings about the dangers of childbirth at Evelyn's age. Mrs. Talbot sent a note suggesting that perhaps this was punishment for their scandalous behavior. Evelyn burned it without showing Silas. Emma visited regularly, having taken a job at the general store and renting a room above it. She was saving money, planning to go to Denver and train as a teacher. "You inspired me," she told Evelyn, "watching you build this life. It made me realize I could build my own too." Sarah wrote from her parents' home. She was doing well, she said. Her son was growing. She'd started working with her father's business, managing accounts. Caleb had stopped trying to get her back. "I'm not going to lie," Sarah wrote. "It's hard being a woman alone with a child. People judge. But I'm learning to live with their judgment, and I'm teaching my son that sometimes the right choice is the hard choice." In September, as the leaves began to turn, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult. The doctor came from town and stayed for 36 hours. Silas wore a path in the floorboards from pacing. But when it was over, when the baby's cry finally filled the house, Evelyn looked down at the tiny wrinkled face and felt something shift fundamentally inside her. "She's perfect," she whispered. Silas sat beside the bed, looking at his daughter with wonder. "What should we name her?" "I was thinking Belle, after your cow." He laughed, a wet sound. "You want to name our daughter after a cow? She was important to you. She was part of what built this place." Silas touched the baby's tiny hand, watching her fingers curl around his. "Belle Boone, I like it." They sat together in the soft afternoon light, this small family they'd made against all odds. Outside, the valley stretched golden and vast. Inside, everything that mattered was right here shot. The years that followed weren't easy. There were hard winters and failed harvests and illnesses that scared them. Belle turned out to have her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet determination, which made for some interesting clashes. Emma became a teacher in Denver and married a professor who respected her mind as much as her beauty. She named Evelyn as her daughter's godmother. Sarah eventually remarried, a widower with grown children who treated her as an equal partner. She brought her son to visit the ranch once, and Evelyn watched the way Sarah's eyes had lost their haunted look. The town slowly stopped talking about the scandal of Silas and Evelyn's marriage. New scandals came along to replace it. Eventually, they became just another ranch family, respected for their hard work, known for their generosity, accepted as part of the valley's fabric. But Evelyn never forgot what it had taken to get there, never forgot standing on that train platform, waiting to be sent away. Never forgot the moment Silas had given her a choice instead of a sentence. On their 5th anniversary, they rode out to the ridge overlooking the valley. Belle was with Constance Greer for the afternoon. It was just the two of them, like it had been in the beginning. "You ever regret it?" Silas asked. "Staying here, marrying me?" Evelyn looked out at the land they'd worked together, the home they'd built, the life they'd created from nothing but stubbornness and hope. "Not once," she said. "You?" "Never." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the sky. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been, 34 and rejected, deemed unsuitable for frontier life. That woman seemed like a stranger now. "I was thinking," Silas said, "next spring we could add on to the house, give Belle her own room, maybe even build a proper parlor." "Planning ahead?" "Always." He took her hand. "With you, I'm always planning ahead." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" "Promise." As they rode back toward home, Evelyn thought about what they'd proven. Not to the town, not to the agency, not to anyone but themselves. That worth wasn't determined by age or circumstance. That belonging wasn't something you were given, it was something you built day by day, choice by choice. That love wasn't about being perfect or suitable or good enough. It was about being willing to try, to fail, to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. The rejected woman and the lonely rancher had become so much more than the sum of their parts. They'd become partners, parents, proof that sometimes the best things in life were the ones everyone told you were impossible. The house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, light glowing in the windows. Home. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. Evelyn had spent 34 years being told she wasn't enough. Too old, too plain, too difficult, unsuitable. But standing on that train platform, making the choice to stay, she'd proven something more important than suitability. She'd proven that the only approval that mattered was her own, and that in the end was worth more than all the acceptance the world could offer. The frontier hadn't broken her. It had given her room to become exactly who she was meant to be. And as the sun set over Red Hollow Valley, painting everything in shades of gold, Evelyn Boone smiled. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. And she always had been.